Blood pooled beneath the Gorn girl's mangled body, mingling with the rotting waste behind the trash bins. She would be dead within minutes if the human student didn't act. 18-year-old Arthur Simpson's heart raced as he gazed down at his reptilian classmate Linux. She had gone missing from the Gorn Military Academy a week ago. Now he found her on the edge of death, uniform shredded, green scales sliced open. Arthur was the lone human on planet Garaxis, an outsider among the lizard-like Gorn. Linux's eyes fluttered open. She croaked in broken English, "Help me." Cultural taboos be damned. Arthur scooped up Linux and sprinted for the infirmary. Male Gorn never touched females outside of sanctioned breeding. The medics would refuse to treat her. Arthur didn't care. He would make them save her. He kicked open the infirmary doors. Gorn doctors and nurses froze, mandibles agape at the sight of the human cradling the bleeding female. Arthur whipped out his plasma pistol and aimed it at Dr. Zack's angular head. "Treat her, or I paint the walls with your brain." Dr. Zack gulped. He barked orders at the nurses. They rushed to transfer Linux to a bed and begin patching her wounds. Arthur holstered his gun, breath heaving. He watched the Gorn work, fists clenched. Rage and questions swirled in his mind. Who did this to Linux? Why was she dumped and left to die? He would find out, and there would be human hell to pay. Hours later, as Linux lay recovering in the infirmary, a Gorn guard burst into Arthur's dormitory. "Cadet Simpson, Commandant Zorgax demands your presence in his office immediately." Arthur's boots pounded on the metal floor as he marched through the hallways. He stepped into Zorgax's office and snapped to attention, arm raised in a crisp salute. "At ease, Cadet," Zorgax growled. The massive Gorn rose from his chair, towering over Arthur. A jagged scar ran down his face, one eye socket hollow. "Explain yourself. Why did you violate our most sacred taboo?" "Sir, I couldn't stand by and let a fellow cadet die. Culture be damned, life is more important." Zorgax slammed a clawed fist on his desk. "You risked your own standing to save Linux. That takes guts, Terran." He leaned in close, hot breath washing over Arthur. "What if I told you she was my daughter?" Arthur's eyes widened. "Your daughter, sir?" "Kidnapped by Crimson Claw rebels. That scum Krunox, their warlord, wants to overthrow our government, establish a new order built on savagery." Zorgax spat the words like venom. He demanded a ransom. The High Council refused to deal with terrorists. Zorgax studied him, reptilian eyes glinting. "I see the fire in you, Simpson. Very well. I'm placing a squad of our best commandos under your command. Get my daughter back." Arthur saluted. "Yes, sir." As he geared up in the armory, a message pinged on Arthur's wrist computer. Admiral Hawkins, his human mentor, appeared on the screen. "Arthur, we have intel that the Crimson Claw is being backed by rogue humans, the Black Suns, led by the pirate Maximilian Kane." "What? Why would humans help Gorn rebels?" "Unknown. But watch your back out there. Your actions could impact our alliance with the Gorn. Tread carefully." The screen went dark. Arthur gripped his plasma rifle, jaw clenched. He would save Linux, stop Krunox, and uncover the truth, no matter the cost. He met his squad at the hangar bay, a dozen battle-hardened Gorn commandos. They boarded a dropship and rocketed off toward the jungle stronghold of the Crimson Claw, toward his destiny. The night vision goggles cast an eerie green glow over the dense jungle foliage as Arthur and his squad of Gorn commandos crept through the undergrowth. Krog, Scar, Malgus, Thorn, and Rays moved with the lethal grace of predators, their reptilian eyes scanning for any sign of the enemy. Arthur raised a fist, signaling the squad to halt. Up ahead, a group of Crimson Claw sentries patrolled the perimeter of the stronghold. Arthur used hand signals to direct his squad, assigning targets to each commando. Krog and Scar, armed with plasma blades, surged forward, their movements a blur. In a flash of blue light, they dispatched two of the sentries, their bodies crumpling to the ground. Malgus and Thorn followed close behind, their neural disruptors humming with power. They fired, and the remaining three sentries convulsed as the disruptors overloaded their nervous systems. Rays, the squad's tech specialist, pulled out a datapad and began hacking into the Crimson Claw's communication network. His clawed fingers danced across the screen, bypassing firewalls and decrypting encrypted transmissions. "Got it," Reyes hissed. "Linux is being held in a fortified bunker at the center of the compound." As they approached the bunker, the jungle erupted with gunfire. Plasma bolts sizzled through the air, scorching the trees and sending up plumes of smoke. Arthur and his squad dove for cover, their weapons at the ready. "It's the Black Suns!" Thorne shouted over the din of battle. Arthur peeked out from behind a fallen log and saw a group of heavily armed mercenaries advancing on their position. At their head was a towering cyborg, his body a fusion of flesh and metal. A plasma minigun was grafted to his cybernetic arm, spitting out a hail of energy bolts. Reaper's minigun pinned down Arthur's squad, the plasma bolts chewing through their cover. Arthur knew they were outgunned. They needed a distraction. "Reyes, detonate the plasma grenades," Arthur ordered. Reyes nodded, pulling out a detonator. With a flick of a switch, the jungle lit up with a series of blinding explosions. The plasma grenades tore through the Black Sun's ranks, sending bodies and debris flying. In the chaos, Arthur and his squad charged forward, firing as they ran. They reached the bunker door, and Krog and Scar made short work of the guards. Reyes hacked the door controls, and they burst inside. There in the center of the room stood Krunox. The massive Gorn warlord was a nightmarish fusion of flesh and technology, his body enhanced with cybernetic implants. He held Linux by the throat, his claws digging into her scales. Krunox laughed, a cruel, menacing sound. "Over? No, human, it's just beginning. Linux is my key to power. With her as my hostage, the Gorn government will have no choice but to recognize the Crimson Claw as the rightful rulers of Garaxis." Krunox tossed Linux aside and drew his own weapon, a crackling energy whip. "Then come, human, let us dance the dance of death." They clashed in a flurry of plasma and sparks, their weapons a blur of motion. Arthur ducked and weaved, his sword deflecting Krunox's whip. The Gorn warlord was strong, his cybernetic enhancements giving him an edge in raw power. But Arthur was fast, his human reflexes allowing him to stay one step ahead. He pressed the attack, driving Krunox back with a series of lightning-fast strikes. Krunox stumbled, and Arthur saw his opening. With a final desperate lunge, Arthur disarmed Krunox, sending the energy whip flying. He leveled his plasma sword at the warlord's throat, ready to end it once and for all. Suddenly the wall exploded inward, showering the room with rubble. Through the dust and debris, Arthur saw Reaper, his plasma minigun blazing with hellish light. Arthur's squad reacted with lightning speed as Reaper's plasma bolts ripped through the bunker. Malgus and Thorne returned fire, their plasma rifles flaring. 2 Black Sun's mercs crumpled, armor smoking. Krog and Scar laid down, suppressing fire, green plasma hissing through the air. "Get the girl out of here," Krog roared. Reyes' claws flew over his datapad. The bunker's auto-turrets swiveled and opened up on the Black Suns with a hail of blue energy bolts. Seizing the moment, Arthur scooped up Linux and sprinted for the door, keeping his head low. Krunox took advantage of the chaos to slip away through a hidden tunnel, the coward. In the clearing ahead, a squad of Black Sun's power armor troopers waited, weapons trained on Arthur. A man stepped forward, his armor painted with the insignia of a colonel. Arthur passed Linux to Krog, never taking his eyes off the merc leader. "Colonel Hawk, heard you turned traitor, sold out to the Black Suns." Hawk laughed harshly. "The Black Suns are the future, boy. The Gorn have to fall. Earth will rule the stars, as is our destiny." Arthur drew his plasma sword. "How about you step out of that tin can and face me, Hawk? Or are you too much of a coward?" "I like your spirit, kid, stupid but ballsy. All right, I'll play your game." Hawk's armor opened with a hiss. He stepped out, a muscular man with cold cybernetic eyes. He cracked his knuckles. "Let's dance." He parried Hawk's punches and returned with a devastating combo. Ribs cracked, blood sprayed. Hawk staggered back, spitting red. "Enough!" Arthur tackled Hawk to the ground and rained down blows. The colonel's face turned to bloody pulp. Finally, mercifully, Arthur relented. Hawk coughed, laughing through broken teeth. You think you've won? The wheels are already in motion. The Gorn will fall. Earth will... Arthur silenced him with a final punch. He stood, retrieving his sword. Squad, move out. We're getting off this rock. They fought their way back through the jungle, cutting down Black Sun's mercs and Crimson Claw rebels alike. Plasma bolts and explosions lit up the night, casting eerie shadows through the trees. Finally, they reached the extraction point. A Gorn dropship waited, engines humming. Arthur and his squad piled in, Linux safe in their midst. As the ship blasted off, Arthur stared out the viewport at the fading jungle, his mind reeling. The Black Suns planning to destabilize the Gorn as a prelude to invasion. He had to warn Admiral Hawkins. The fate of Earth and Garaxis hung in the balance. The dropship tore through the atmosphere, rocketing into the star-filled void of space, toward Garaxis Prime, toward destiny. The Gorn dropship roared through the blackness of space, ferrying Arthur, Linux, and the Gorn commandos back to Garaxis Prime. Arthur stared out the viewport, his mind reeling from the revelations of the Black Sun's treachery. The dropship docked at the capital city's spaceport, and the heroes disembarked to a hero's welcome. Gorn soldiers snapped to attention as Arthur and his squad marched down the ramp, Linux supported between them. Commandant Zorgax pushed through the crowd, his scarred face etched with relief. He embraced Linux, his massive frame dwarfing her. "My daughter," Zorgax rumbled, "you're safe." Linux smiled weakly. "Thanks to Arthur, he saved me." Zorgax turned to Arthur, his one good eye gleaming. He unclipped a shining medal from his uniform, the Gorn Medal of Valor. He pinned it to Arthur's chest. "For conspicuous gallantry," Zorgax proclaimed. "You've done the Gorn a great service, Terran. We won't forget it." Arthur saluted. "Thank you, sir, but the fight's not over. The Black Suns are planning something big. We need to stop them." Zorgax nodded grimly. "We'll discuss it in the command center. For now, rest. You've earned it." Arthur and Linux sat in the infirmary, Linux's wounds being tended by Gorn medics. She gripped Arthur's hand, her scaled skin cool against his. "I want to help, Arthur," Linux said. "I can't let the Black Suns get away with this, with what they did to me." Arthur squeezed her hand. "I know. We'll stop them together." "Admiral, I need a favor. The Black Suns are up to something on Garaxis Prime. I need a team of your best operatives." Hawkins frowned. "I'll do you one better. I'm sending Captain Jake Wraith Reese. He's the best we've got, former Black Ops. He'll get to the bottom of this." Arthur grinned. "Thank you, sir. Simpson out." The next day, a sleek UEDF stealth ship landed at the spaceport. The ramp lowered, and out strode Captain Reese. He was lean and hard, with a face like chiseled granite. A plasma rifle was slung across his back. "Captain Reese," Arthur said, "glad you could make it." Reese shook his hand, grip firm. "Wouldn't miss it. I've been itching to take down the Black Suns for years. Where do we start?" Arthur led Reese, Linux, and the UEDF team to a seedy bar in the city's underground. They pushed through the crowd of Gorn and humans, the air thick with the stench of alcohol and sweat. In a back room, they found a battered door. Arthur kicked it in, revealing a Black Sun's safe house. Weapons and gear lay strewn about, along with datapads and holomaps. "You're not gonna like this," he said. "The Black Suns are planning to assassinate the Gorn Emperor during the military parade tomorrow. They want to throw Garaxis into chaos." Arthur slammed his fist into his palm. "Not if we stop them." Suddenly plasma bolts sliced through the room. A Black Suns kill team burst in, led by a figure in a shimmering cloaking field. "It's the Ghost," Reese shouted. "Look out!" A plasma bolt caught Reese in the shoulder, spinning him around. Arthur and Linux dove for cover, returning fire. Linux snatched it up and fired, the plasma bolt taking the Ghost through the faceplate. It slumped, dead. Arthur helped Reese to his feet, the captain's shoulder smoking. "We need to get to that parade," Reese gritted out, "before it's too late." They raced through the city streets, shoving past startled Gorn civilians. The blare of military music grew louder. The parade had already begun. Arthur and his team took up positions around the Emperor's podium, scanning the crowd. There, among the sea of gaunt faces, Arthur spotted a group of soldiers moving with a predatory grace. "There," he shouted, "Cronox and his men." Cronox turned, his eyes widening. He ripped a plasma pistol from his holster. His men did the same. Arthur and Lennox charged, plasma bolts sizzling past them. They slammed into the disguised assassins, knocking them to the ground. The crowd screamed and scattered as plasma fire filled the air. Arthur grappled with Cronox, the warlord's cybernetic arm clamping around his throat. Cronox's cybernetic arm clamped down on Arthur's throat, metal digits crushing his windpipe. The human soldier choked and gasped, black spots dancing in his vision. With a roar of effort, he wrenched Cronox's arm away and head-butted the warlord square in the face. Cronox staggered back, green blood spurting from his shattered snout. Lennox leapt into the fray, her plasma blades flashing. She sliced through Cronox's armor, the superheated edges searing flesh. Cronox bellowed in pain and lashed out with his own plasma claws, the deadly blades extending from his gauntlets. The two Gorn clashed in a whirlwind of slashing plasma, sparks flying. Arthur surged to his feet and charged back into the battle, his plasma sword humming. He and Lennox fought side by side, their movements perfectly synchronized. They drove Cronox back with a flurry of strikes, the warlord's defenses crumbling under their relentless assault. Across the parade grounds, Captain Reese and the UEDF team fought their way through the sea of panicked Gorn civilians. Plasma bolts sizzled overhead as they formed a protective cordon around the Emperor, hustling him towards a waiting dropship. "Get him out of here!" Reese barked into his comm, laying down suppressing fire with his plasma rifle. Suddenly, a massive explosion rocked the city center. Fire and debris erupted into the sky as a Black Sun's demolition charge detonated, reducing a nearby skyscraper to rubble. The shockwave knocked Arthur and Lennox off their feet, sending them sprawling. Through the smoke and dust, Arthur spotted a Black Sun's dropship screaming towards the parade grounds, its plasma cannons spitting blue fire. At the controls, the scarred visage of Colonel Hawk leered down at them, eyes blazing with hate. "Die, you Gorn-loving scum!" Hawk roared over the dropship's loudspeakers. The cannon swiveled, locking onto Arthur and Lennox. Arthur rolled to his feet, snatching up a fallen plasma launcher. He shouldered the weapon and took aim, the targeting reticle flashing red. With a prayer to whatever gods might be listening, he pulled the trigger. The plasma warhead streaked towards the dropship, a blazing comet of blue fire. It slammed into the vessel's engines, detonating in a blinding flash. The dropship lurched and spun, trailing smoke and flames. It careened into a nearby building, exploding in a massive fireball. Cronox, seeing his plans unraveling, let out a howl of rage. He charged at Arthur, a plasma grenade clutched in his clawed hand. His eyes blazed with murderous intent, determined to take the human with him into oblivion. "Arthur, look out!" Lennox screamed. She shoved Arthur aside with all her strength, sending him tumbling. The plasma grenade detonated, engulfing Lennox in a blinding flash of searing heat and light. When the smoke cleared, Arthur stared in horror at Lennox's lifeless body, her once vibrant scales charred black. Rage and grief surged through him, a primal howl tearing from his throat. He rounded on Cronox, plasma sword blazing. The warlord never stood a chance. Arthur tore into him with a fury he had never known, his blade a blur of searing light. He hacked and slashed, severing cybernetic limbs and sending sprays of green blood arcing through the air. With a final wrenching thrust, Arthur drove his plasma sword through Cronox's chest. The warlord convulsed, his cybernetic eye flickering and dying. He slid off Arthur's blade and crumpled to the ground, nothing more than a twisted mass of meat and metal. Arthur staggered to Lennox's side and gathered her into his arms, tears streaming down his face. He pressed his forehead to hers, sobs racking his body. The Gorn Emperor approached, flanked by his honor guard. He placed a clawed hand on Arthur's shoulder, his voice heavy with sorrow. "She died a warrior's death," the Emperor rumbled. "Saving the life of her comrade, there is no greater honor." He unfastened a gleaming medal from his own uniform and pinned it to Arthur's chest. "Rise, Arthur Simpson, citizen of Goraxis, hero of the Gorn." Arthur stood, cradling Lennox's body. The medal felt heavy on his chest, a weight he would carry for the rest of his days. "I will find those responsible," he vowed, his voice cold as steel. "The Black Suns will pay for what they've done. I won't rest until I've hunted them down, every last one." Captain Reese stepped forward, his face grim. "The UEDF is with you, Arthur. We'll burn the Black Suns from the stars no matter where they hide." Arthur nodded, his jaw set. He knew the path before him would be long and hard, filled with blood and loss. But he would walk it to the end, for Lennox, for the Gorn, for the innocent lives the Black Suns had destroyed. He would have his vengeance, and the galaxy would tremble before his wrath. Arthur and the UEDF team, armed with intelligence extracted from captured Black Suns operatives, plotted a course for the Zeta Centauri system. Their target, a remote asteroid field housing the Black Suns' main base of operations. The team, bolstered by a contingent of battle-hardened Gorn special forces led by Commandant Zorgax, prepared for a daring assault on the heavily fortified base. They checked their weapons and armor, the hum of plasma rifles and the clank of metal filling the dropship's hold. "Listen up," Captain Reese barked, his scarred face illuminated by the dim red light. "We hit them hard and fast, no mercy, for Lennox, for the Gorn, for every innocent life these bastards have taken." Arthur nodded, his grip tightening on his plasma sword. The memory of Lennox's sacrifice burned in his mind, fueling his desire for revenge. The dropship shuddered as it entered the asteroid field, weaving through the tumbling rocks. The Black Sun's base loomed ahead, a sprawling metal fortress bristling with gun turrets and sensor arrays. "Breaching in 3, 2, 1. The dropship's hatch blew open, and Arthur and his team poured out, plasma bolts sizzling through the void. They hit the airlock in a hail of fire, cutting down the surprised Black Sun's guards. The heavy metal doors groaned open, and they plunged into the base's labyrinthine tunnels. Black Sun's mercenaries swarmed from every direction, their plasma rifles spitting blue death. Arthur and his team fought back with relentless fury, Gorn warriors roaring as they tore through the enemy ranks. Arthur was a whirlwind of plasma and steel, his sword flashing as he cut down foe after foe. His rage burned hot, driving him ever deeper into the base. They blasted through blast doors and bulkheads, leaving a trail of smoking corpses in their wake. Automated defense turrets swiveled to track them, but Raze's expert hacking soon had them targeting the Black Suns instead. Deep in the heart of the base, they breached a massive hangar bay and stumbled to a halt, eyes wide. A fleet of sleek, deadly warships filled the cavernous space, their hulls emblazoned with the Black Sun emblem. "By the Emperor," Zorgax breathed, "they've been busy." Reese scanned the ships with his wrist comp, shaking his head. "Gorn and human tech, they've been playing both sides, stealing our secrets." Arthur's fists clenched. "They're planning an invasion. We have to stop them." They raced for the reactor core, fighting every step of the way. The Black Suns threw everything they had at them, from drones to power-armored shock troopers, but Arthur and his team were unstoppable. They breached the reactor room, plasma flying. There, standing before the pulsing core, was Maximilian Kane himself. The Black Sun's leader was tall and lean, his face handsome and cruel. "Not half as much as you've caused," Arthur snarled, leveling his sword. Kane laughed. "You have spirit, I'll give you that. You could be useful to me. Join me, Arthur. Together we could rule this galaxy." For a moment Arthur hesitated. The power Kane offered was tempting, but then he remembered Lennox dying in his arms. He remembered his duty, his honor. They clashed in a storm of plasma, Kane's black sword meeting Arthur's blue. They dueled across the reactor platform, blades flashing faster than the eye could follow. But Arthur was driven by something more than greed or ambition. He fought for justice, for revenge, for love. With a final desperate lunge, he drove his sword through Kane's black heart. His hand slammed down on a console, and alarms blared throughout the base. Self-destruct sequence initiated. Core overload in T-5 minutes. Arthur and his team raced for the hangar, fighting off the last desperate resistance from the Black Suns. They piled into a captured frigate, rays coaxing the engines to life. They blasted out of the hangar just as the base exploded behind them, a miniature sun blooming in the void. The shockwave buffeted their ship, but they rode it out, streaking away into the stars. In the frigate's hold, Arthur slumped against a bulkhead, exhausted but triumphant. They had dealt the Black Suns a crippling blow. Linux's death had been avenged. But there was no time to rest. An urgent message pinged on the comm, the Gorn Emperor's face appearing on the screen. "Arthur Simpson, we need you. Garaxis Prime is under attack. Krunox has returned with the Crimson Claw Warfleet. You must hurry." Arthur straightened, a new fire kindling in his eyes. His mission was far from over. Garaxis needed him. The galaxy needed him. The frigate tore through the void, alarms blaring as it streaked towards Garaxis Prime. On the bridge, Arthur gripped the command console, knuckles white. The mysterious message played on a loop in his mind, a taunting whisper of some new, unseen threat. But there was no time to dwell on it now. Garaxis was in peril. As they entered the planet's atmosphere, the scope of the chaos became clear. Pillars of smoke rose from the capital city, the distant rumble of explosions and plasma fire echoing through the air. The Crimson Claw had returned, and they were out for blood. The frigate touched down on a landing pad, the ramp lowering with a hiss. Arthur, Captain Reese, and Commandant Zorgax strode out, weapons at the ready. The city was a war zone, Gorn security forces locked in brutal street battles with the Crimson Claw insurgents. "Krunox has taken the military base on the outskirts," Zorgax growled, pointing to a holographic map of the city. "He's using our own weapons against us." Arthur's jaw tightened. Krunox, the man who had taken so much from him, was still alive, still a threat. It was time to end this once and for all. They quickly formulated a plan, splitting into 3 teams. Arthur would lead a group of Gorn commandos to storm the base's main gate, drawing the bulk of Krunox's forces into a fierce firefight. Captain Reese and his team would infiltrate the base through a series of underground tunnels, planting explosives at key structural points. Zorgax and his team would assault the command center, where Krunox was coordinating the attack. Arthur and his commandos moved through the city streets, plasma rifles at the ready. The sound of battle grew louder as they approached the base, the crack of plasma fire and the roar of explosions filling the air. They reached the main gate, a towering structure of reinforced metal. Arthur signaled to his team and they took up positions, ready to breach. "On my mark," Arthur said, his voice steady. 3, 2, 1, mark! They charged forward, plasma grenades arcing through the air. The explosions tore through the gate, sending shards of metal flying. Arthur and his team poured through the breach, plasma rifles blazing. The Crimson Claw forces responded in kind, a hail of plasma bolts ripping through the air. Arthur ducked and weaved, his rifle spitting blue fire. A Gorn commando fell beside him, his chest a smoking ruin. Arthur gritted his teeth and pushed forward, his team spreading out to flank the enemy. They fought their way through the base, leaving a trail of Crimson Claw bodies in their wake. In the command center, Krunox watched the battle unfold on a series of holographic screens. His cybernetic eye glowed red, his clawed hands clenched into fists. "Crush them," he snarled to his subordinates. "I want Arthur Simpson's head on a spike." Suddenly the door to the command center exploded inward. Zorgax charged through the smoke, plasma blades flashing. Krunox roared in rage and leapt to meet him, his own blades extending from his gauntlets. They clashed in the center of the room, sparks flying as their blades met. Krunox was strong, his cybernetic enhancements giving him an edge, but Zorgax was a seasoned warrior, his skills honed by decades of battle. They traded blows, the air crackling with the heat of their plasma blades. Krunox landed a heavy blow, sending Zorgax staggering back. He pressed his advantage, raining down strikes, forcing Zorgax to give ground. Just as Krunox was about to deliver the killing blow, the door burst open once more. Arthur charged in, plasma sword blazing. Krunox turned to face this new threat, and Zorgax seized his chance. He lunged forward, his blade piercing Krunox's chest. The warlord howled in agony, his cybernetic eye flickering. Zorgax twisted the blade, and Krunox went limp, slumping to the floor. At that moment, a series of explosions rocked the base. Captain Reese and his team had done their job, planting charges at key points. The base shuddered and groaned, walls crumbling, ceilings collapsing. Arthur, Zorgax, and Reese rallied the Gorn security forces, launching a counterattack against the remaining Crimson Claw insurgents. They fought their way out of the base, plasma bolts filling the air, explosions shaking the ground. Finally, the last of the insurgents were driven from the city, fleeing into the wilderness. Arthur stood atop a pile of rubble, his armor scorched and battered, his plasma sword still glowing in his hand. The Gorn cheered, raising their weapons in salute. Zorgax clapped Arthur on the shoulder, his face split by a fierce grin. "You've done it again, Arthur," he rumbled. "Saved Garaxis from the brink of destruction." Arthur nodded, exhaustion settling into his bones. But even as the Gorn celebrated around him, his mind was already turning to the future, to the mysterious message that hinted at some new, unknown threat. He knew that his fight was far from over, that there would always be another battle to be fought, another enemy to face. But for now, he allowed himself a moment of rest, a moment of peace. The galaxy would need him again soon enough. Arthur stared at the cryptic message, his brow furrowed in concentration. The words seemed to taunt him, hinting at a deeper, more sinister truth lurking beneath the surface. He turned to Captain Reese and Commandant Zorgax, who were studying the message over his shoulder. "What do you make of it?" Arthur asked, his voice tense. Reese shook his head, his cybernetic eye whirring as it scanned the text. "It's heavily encrypted, but there are certain patterns that suggest a hidden meaning. We need to run this through our decryption algorithms." Zorgax nodded, his scarred face grim. "I have a feeling this is just the tip of the iceberg. We need to investigate further." Arthur and his team set to work, poring over data streams and intelligence reports, searching for any clues that might shed light on the mysterious message. As they dug deeper, a disturbing picture began to emerge. They uncovered evidence of a secret cabal known as the Shadow Collective, a group of wealthy and influential individuals from both human and Gorn societies. The Shadow Collective, it seemed, had been pulling the strings behind the scenes, orchestrating conflicts and profiting from the chaos. Arthur's blood ran cold as he realized the true extent of the Shadow Collective's influence. They had been responsible for funding both the Black Suns and the Crimson Claw, using them as pawns in a larger game of galactic dominance. "We have to stop them," Arthur said, his voice hard with determination. "We can't let them continue to manipulate events and cause suffering." Arthur and his team began to formulate a plan, a covert mission to infiltrate the Shadow Collective's inner circle. They would pose as wealthy arms dealers, using fake identities and backstories to gain access to an exclusive auction where the Cabal was selling advanced weapons technology to the highest bidder. As they prepared for the mission, Arthur couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into a trap, but he knew they had no choice. The Shadow Collective had to be stopped, no matter the cost. The team arrived at the auction, a glittering affair held in a sprawling mansion on a distant planet. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and the chatter of wealthy patrons, all eager to get their hands on the latest in weapons technology. Arthur scanned the crowd, his eyes searching for any sign of the Shadow Collective's leadership. Suddenly he spotted a familiar face among the attendees, Colonel Hawk, who had seemingly perished in the destruction of the Black Sun's asteroid base. Arthur's heart raced as he realized the truth. Hawk had been working for the Shadow Collective all along, using his position within the Black Suns to further their agenda. The team moved quickly, placing their bids on a highly sought-after piece of technology, a quantum-entangled communication device that would allow them to eavesdrop on the Shadow Collective's secure communications network. As they waited for the auction to conclude, Arthur kept a close eye on Hawk, watching for any sign of recognition. Just as the auctioneer was about to announce the winning bid, Hawk's eyes locked with Arthur's. In that moment, Arthur knew they had been exposed. Hawk's face twisted into a snarl as he reached for his weapon, his intentions clear. All hell broke loose as plasma bolts filled the air, the wealthy patrons screaming and diving for cover. Arthur and his team sprang into action, their weapons drawn as they fought their way through the chaos. They managed to secure the communication device, but their escape was cut off by Hawk and his men. Arthur knew they had only one choice. They had to fight their way out. The team burst through the mansion's doors, plasma bolts sizzling past their heads. They raced for their waiting vehicle, a sleek hovercar armed with the latest in weapons technology. As they sped through the streets of the sprawling metropolis, Hawk and his men gave chase, their own vehicles bristling with firepower. Plasma bolts slammed into the hovercar's armored hull, the impact nearly throwing Arthur from his seat. Reese, manning the vehicle's weapon systems, returned fire, his shots precise and deadly. 2 of Hawk's vehicles exploded in balls of flame, but more kept coming, their relentless pursuit never slowing. Arthur gritted his teeth as he wrenched the controls, sending the hovercar careening around a tight corner. The streets were a blur of neon lights and screaming pedestrians, the chaos of the chase only adding to the pandemonium. Just as it seemed they might make a clean escape, a plasma bolt slammed into the hovercar's engine, sending it spiraling out of control. The vehicle crashed into a nearby building, the impact throwing Arthur and his team from their seats. Arthur struggled to his feet, his head ringing from the crash. He looked around, his heart sinking as he realized the extent of the damage. Several members of the team were seriously injured, their bodies broken and bleeding. But there was no time to rest, no time to tend to their wounds. The Shadow Collective was closing in, their forces converging on the crash site. Arthur knew they had to keep moving, had to find a way to escape. Reese, his face grim with determination, pulled Arthur aside. "We can't let them get the communication device," he said, his voice tense. "We have to get it to a safe location, somewhere we can decrypt it." Arthur nodded, his mind racing as he tried to come up with a plan. Suddenly an idea struck him. He turned to Zorgax, his eyes blazing. "The Gorn Embassy," Arthur said, his voice urgent. "It's the only place the Shadow Collective can't touch us. We have to get there fast." Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they reached the Gorn Embassy. The massive building loomed before them, its walls bristling with defenses. Arthur knew that, once they were inside, they would be safe, at least for a little while. But as they approached the entrance, Arthur's heart sank. The embassy was surrounded by human and Gorn authorities, their weapons trained on the team. Arthur realized with a sinking feeling that they had been misled, that the Shadow Collective had used their influence to turn the authorities against them. They were now wanted fugitives, hunted by the very people they had sworn to protect. Arthur knew they had no choice but to run, to find a way to clear their names and expose the Shadow Collective's treachery. With a heavy heart, Arthur led his team away from the embassy, disappearing into the shadows of the city. They had the communication device, but at a heavy cost. They were injured, exhausted, and on the run, with no allies to turn to. But Arthur refused to give up. He knew that the Shadow Collective's plans had to be stopped, no matter the cost. With grim determination, he and his team set out to decrypt the communication device, to find a way to expose the Cabal's nefarious plans before it was too late. In a nondescript safe house on the outskirts of a sprawling metropolis, Arthur and his team huddled around a holographic display, their faces bathed in the eerie blue glow of the decrypted data streaming from the quantum-entangled communication device. As they delved deeper into the Shadow Collective's secrets, a chilling realization dawned upon them. "It's worse than we thought," Captain Reese muttered, his brow furrowed. "They're not just trying to profit from a war between the Gorn and humans. They want to control the entire galaxy." Arthur zoomed in on a set of coordinates hidden within the encrypted files. "And they've got the means to do it. Look at this, a secret base on an uncharted planet, housing an army of genetically engineered super soldiers." The team exchanged grim looks, the weight of their discovery hanging heavy in the air. They knew they had to act fast, before the Shadow Collective could unleash their deadly army upon the unsuspecting galaxy. Loading up on weapons and gear, they boarded their stealth ship and set a course for the remote planet. As they hurtled through the void of space, Arthur couldn't shake the feeling that they were heading into a trap. But there was no turning back now. The fate of billions hung in the balance. As they entered the planet's atmosphere, the ship's sensors lit up with warnings. The Shadow Collective's base was heavily fortified, with advanced defense systems and a small army of loyal mercenaries guarding its perimeter. "We'll have to fight our way in," Arthur said, checking the charge on his plasma rifle. "Stay sharp and watch each other's backs." The team landed in a dense jungle a few kilometers from the base, using the cover of the lush foliage to mask their approach. They moved silently through the undergrowth, the hum of insects and the distant cries of alien creatures filling the air. Suddenly a burst of plasma fire erupted from the trees ahead, sizzling past Arthur's head. The Shadow Collective's mercenaries had spotted them, and all hell broke loose. Arthur and his team dove for cover, returning fire with their own weapons. Plasma bolts scorched the air, setting the jungle ablaze. The stench of burnt foliage and ozone filled Arthur's nostrils as he ducked and weaved, his rifle barking in his hands. They fought their way through the jungle, inch by bloody inch, leaving a trail of smoking corpses in their wake. The mercenaries were well-trained and heavily armed, but Arthur and his team were fueled by a righteous fury, determined to see their mission through to the end. Finally, they reached the base's perimeter, a towering wall of reinforced metal bristling with gun turrets and sensor arrays. Captain Reese, his face streaked with sweat and grime, pulled out a jetpack and slapped it onto the wall. "Fire in the holes!" he yelled, as the team ducked for cover. The explosion tore a gaping hole in the wall and they charged through, weapons blazing. The base's interior was a maze of corridors and chambers, each one filled with more mercenaries and deadly traps. But Arthur and his team pressed on, driven by a sense of purpose and a thirst for justice. They fought their way deeper into the base, their armor scorched and battered, their faces grim with determination. Finally they reached the heart of the base, a vast cavernous chamber filled with rows upon rows of stasis pods, each one containing a genetically engineered super soldier. And there, standing before them, was the mastermind behind it all. "Zorgax," Arthur breathed, his eyes wide with shock and betrayal. The Gorn commandant turned to face them, his once proud features twisted with madness and hate. "Arthur Simpson," he sneered, his voice dripping with venom. "You've been a thorn in my side for far too long." "Why?" Arthur demanded, his grip tightening on his rifle. "Why would you betray your own people, your own daughter?" Zorgax laughed, a harsh, grating sound that echoed through the chamber. "Linux was a means to an end, nothing more. Her death served a greater purpose, to manipulate you, to draw you into my web." Arthur's blood boiled with rage, and he lunged forward, his rifle forgotten as he slammed into Zorgax with all his might. They grappled across the chamber floor, trading blows that would have shattered stone. Around them, Arthur's team engaged the remaining mercenaries and the first wave of awakened super soldiers, the chamber erupting into a maelstrom of plasma fire and screams. Arthur and Zorgax fought like demons, their strength and speed enhanced by the rage that consumed them. They clashed again and again, blood spattering the floor as they tore at each other with savage fury. In the end, it was Arthur who emerged victorious, standing over Zorgax's broken body with a plasma blade in his hand. But the victory was short-lived. The base's self-destruct sequence had been activated, the countdown blaring over the loudspeakers. Arthur and his surviving teammates raced for the exit, dodging falling debris and exploding consoles as the base tore itself apart around them. They burst out into the jungle just as the final explosion consumed the base, the shockwave knocking them off their feet. As the dust settled, Arthur staggered to his feet, his heart heavy with grief. Captain Reese and many of his other allies had fallen in the battle, their sacrifices etched into his soul. The Shadow Collective had been defeated, their army of super soldiers destroyed before it could be unleashed. But the cost had been high, and the scars would linger long after the smoke had cleared. In the days that followed, the Gorn and human governments worked tirelessly to root out the remaining members of the Shadow Collective, their once-hidden machinations laid bare for all to see. Treaties were signed, alliances forged, and a new era of cooperation and understanding dawned between the two species. But for Arthur, the battle was over. The revelation of Zorgax's betrayal, the loss of his friends and allies, had taken a toll on his soul. He knew that he could no longer walk the path of a soldier, his heart yearning for something more. And so, with a heavy heart and a determined spirit, Arthur bid farewell to his old life and set out on a new journey, a journey to promote peace and understanding between all species, to build bridges where once there had been only walls. He would honor the memory of Linux and all those who had fought and died beside him, carrying their legacy with him as he strove to create a better future for all. The road ahead would be long and fraught with challenges, but Arthur knew that he could not falter. For in the end, it was not the battles that defined a warrior, but the ideals for which they fought, and Arthur would fight for those ideals until his dying breath, a beacon of hope in a galaxy that had known too much darkness. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.